For those listening for the first time, I have my first sponsor, and I could not think of a better one than mempool.space, a fantastic Bitcoin block explorer. We are still using Wiz's mempool here, but like most things in my life, I'm moving towards free and open source software, and you get that with this Bitcoin block explorer. So you do not need to trust Wiz's mempool, i.e. mempool.space. You can easily host it yourself. More to come on this front at the park in 2023. But mempool is becoming much more than your traditional block explorer. It is becoming a multi-layer explorer from layer 0 mempool, layer 1 the Bitcoin blockchain, layer 2 plus like Lightning, Liquid, and more. And that more part is for those interested in Bitcoin mining. They have a robust mining dashboard, which I check every day. So give it a shot yourself at mempool.space. My second show supporter, and it is Blockstream Jade. Blockstream Jade is an open source hardware wallet for the cold storage of Bitcoin and Bitcoin layer 2 assets on Liquid, such as stablecoins and security tokens. I personally only use my Blockstream Jade for storing Bitcoin, but that is me. Blockstream Jade houses a camera and full color display, allowing for fully air-gapped Bitcoin transactions. You can scan and display QR codes directly on the device to sign transactions and verify addresses with ease and peace of mind. You can manage your assets from mobile or desktop with Jade-compatible wallets such as Blockstream Green, Blue Wallet, Electrum, and my personal choice and favorite, Sparrow. Go to blockstream.com/Jade, Jade, to learn more and also buy one if you're so inclined.
If there is a way to kind of take people that are currently, doing this work and just educating them enough on Bitcoin so that it doesn't seem like a huge hurdle for them, I think that just provides an avenue for, just like we try to educate on the Bitcoin side broadly, if you can take people that are already doing accounting, already doing bookkeeping, and just give them a few resources, I think that opens up the kind of the ecosystem to a better, more knowledgeable accounting industry, right? So I'd love to be able to do stuff like that over the course of the next few years.
Welcome to the Builders in Bitcoin podcast, a podcast about the people who bring Bitcoin to life. I'm your host, Rod, and I go by the handle BitKite on Twitter, and I'm also on Nostr. You can find my NPub pinned to my Twitter profile. My guest this week is Joe Wood, CPA and founder of Satoshi Pacioli Accounting Services. Joe is leveraging his 15 years of professional accounting experience to help businesses using Bitcoin achieve efficiency and peace of mind through bookkeeping, tax reporting, and financial planning services. In this episode, we discuss and dig into the importance of having an accountant who understands Bitcoin, being a resource in the community, the positives and negatives of being a sole proprietor, and a lot more. I really enjoyed my conversation with Joe, and I hope you will too. So let's just jump right in. Joe Wood, welcome to the Builders in Bitcoin. How you doing, my man?
I'm doing great. A couple of days here at Bitcoin Park. It's been a great experience. Looking forward to this.
Thanks, man. And thanks for doing this kind of impromptu Builders episode. I have a million personal questions as it relates to my number of businesses. And I promise you, I'm not going to ask them all and take advantage of you and make this a free consulting session. But no, I really appreciate it. And I know you've given up a lot of your time, especially with a number of members of the community here this past couple days. So it means a lot. So thanks again for coming.
Yeah, absolutely. Fire away.
So even before that, how did you get into Bitcoin?
Yeah, I mean, my journey was kind of, I was easy for me to get in of I heard about it. It's always one of those things where people say oh yeah, I saw Bitcoin, I didn't buy into it. I thought it was a scam. I actually never really went through that phase. I was always kind of open to it of hey, this seems really cool. This seems like a good option. But not necessarily going down the rabbit hole of actually how would this work and really learning a lot about it. And so I'd be oh, I'll put a little bit of money in and just kind of see what happens. But it was not enough incentive for me to really learn deeply about it. But then over the course of the years, it goes up a little bit more, it goes up a little bit, you pay it more and more attention, it goes back down, you stop paying attention. And so really for me though, it was, especially with the pandemic, spending more time at home, listening to more podcasts, a lot more content was coming out around then. And so it was just a slow evolution of like, hey, buy a little bit, 2014, 2015, not really doing anything. And then, learning more, having it not die. It's just a slow progression for me.
Yeah, and then 95% of your material net worth is in Bitcoin over time for you just sitting there just
I mean, it ends up like
Nice.
accumulating, right? And it's just like you really get attached to it. You don't want to sell it, So
I absolutely love that. And now to go into the business, which I'm super enamored by because I'm enamored by accounting. People are like, "What the heck are you talking about?" This is such a pain point now, and I'll maybe back up and explain what we've been working on and I've been working on specifically. But there's a number of businesses that we're running. So one of which is Bitcoin Park. I personally have some mining businesses and then some other things going on. All of which I'm trying to operate on a Bitcoin standard, or at least have any, if there is ever any cash flow from this, to actually preserve my wealth in Bitcoin. But I'm also accepting Bitcoin. I'm also using Bitcoin. I'm doing all these things. Now, setting up the proper accounting system has been one of the bane of my existences. I'm freaking chewing glass and trying to figure this out, but it's been very, very difficult. And I just can't, don't feel the 100% comfort that I'm doing everything properly. Even though the effort and intention is there, it's like, I want that green check of like, oh yeah, everything is proper. You're good to go.
yeah.
So before we get into like how you're consulting, what's in the name, by the way? The Satoshi Pacioli, did I
Yeah.
pronounce that correct?
Correct.
Yeah, what's in the name?
So Satoshi, obviously, everyone who's listening to this will be aware of. And then similar to that is the Luca Pacioli was the father, essentially modern accounting. He was alive in the 1400s during the Renaissance in Italy, and essentially, he kind of put together different methods that local vendors were using there, and it's essentially double entry bookkeeping. That was, he termed it. He was a mathematician, and it's the same as basic accounting procedures that we use today. And so it's been something that was kind of created, put together in the Renaissance, and something that's lived on for 500 years. And so I think you can make that analogy to what Satoshi did with Bitcoin and money. And so putting those two together, and I think if we're sitting here, not us, but 500 years from now, and they're using Bitcoin, I think you'll see radical changes in the world. And I think Bitcoin or accounting did that from the Renaissance, and really sped up the way the businesses could translate what they were doing into numbers and communicating those messages.
That's so dang cool. And so you obviously are an accountant.
Yes.
And so you've been doing this professionally for a number of years.
Yes.
And then decided to become a Bitcoin-focused accountant.
Correct.
And so how has that been working out, by the way, for you?
Yeah, it's been really interesting. I've learned a lot.
How so, by the way, learning a lot? Curious.
Honestly, learning a lot on kind of the business side and setting up and what it takes to kind of go out there, find clients.
Got it.
And that I've been doing accounting for 15 years. I understand the accounting stuff, that comes easy, right? But going up, setting up a business of my own, going out, reaching out to people, finding out how to set prices, finding out how to find your niche for the market, what services you actually want to provide. That's kind of been trial and error for me. And so going over that period, it's just been something that I thought would be, that will just be easy. I'll get a couple big clients. I'll just do this.
Yep.
And it's been very different from that.
So you worked at a bigger firm, never on your own. And so this is the first time working on your own.
Yeah, exactly. So all my career, it was either in, private companies or public accounting. And so this was not just move into the Bitcoin space. This was move into running your own business space as well.
Buddy, I absolutely love that. We need more entrepreneurs. It's kind of like we need more people contributing to open source. We need more, and I hate using the word small business, but we just need more entrepreneurs that just have businesses that, provide value.
Yeah. And I think that thinking goes along like with the Bitcoin rabbit hole of just like, hey, I want to be in charge of what I'm doing. I want to be in charge of my schedule. I want to be in charge of my day. And so like I can go work for a company, make a good wage, and go home. But is that really what I want to spend 40 hours of my time, 50, 60 hours of my time every week? Or do I want to kind of build something that I think is important and work with people that I think are doing good work?
Totally. And I echo this a lot on this pod and elsewhere in IRL. Your time, capital, and reputation. Where are you spending your time? Where are you investing your capital? And where are you providing your reputation to back it all up? Is mission critical. And then honestly, tying in your passion with your expertise in Bitcoin. And this is a big need in my humble opinion. And I do think, not to give you some unsolicited two sats advice, but the consulting on the existing systems that business owners may have in place from the bookkeeping side and then the tax side is people may want to be like, oh, I do want to accept Bitcoin, but it paralyzes them because they can't fit it into their existing systems to properly account for it. So then they just stop. Whereas maybe you can come in and provide that unlock to say, hey, if you do set up an IBEX or you do set up a BTC Pay server and you start accepting, here's how you would set up for example, in the States, like the sales tax and how you would pay that off and put it into your bookkeeping system or whatever that may be. I think there is a huge opportunity in that world.
Yeah, I agree. And I've seen a little bit of that. It's interesting in that for the smaller businesses, it's kind of easier to get that message across of like, hey, you can do this. We might spend a little time up front, but once we kind of do it, we set up the right processes. It won't really be all that different. And in some cases, it can end up being easier. But the larger that business is, the more they have their current system set up and it's ideally running smoothly, right? Yep. And then you want to like put Bitcoin in that and like it will throw everything off and they'll have to reorganize everything that they're doing. And so like when you're a large organization, you might have a accounting staff of 5-6 people, obviously up to, multi-billion-dollar corporations. Like that's going to be really hard for them.
They don't like change, I don't think.
Right. And so it's like, making this small little tweak, and it's like everyone in their accounting department is going to freak out and like, hey, this is not how we do things, right? Versus if you're small, you got a couple employees, up to, 20, 30, like those changes you can do relatively easily. And especially if you plan and think through it before you start doing it, it's not as bad as I think people expect it to be.
Totally. And then the other cool thing I think for you especially is Bitcoin. So for me, we have personally have a bookkeeper and then an accountant and then another accountant explaining Bitcoin and then the treatment of Bitcoin or, hey, this is how we've received this Bitcoin. This is, XYZ, I think classification. And just that back and forth of my time investing in these resources to educate them where I could potentially plug and play you to either provide that consulting service overlaid or provide you as the bookkeeper, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah. Make sure I'm not like overselling you or underselling you. And you could then be that full stack for a lot of these business owners. And the cool thing is like we got an existing system and I'm a Bitcoiner, so I want to just make it better with Bitcoin. So I'm obviously a bit different. But those that are starting new businesses probably want to just have like a quick chat with you just to say, hey, here's like the 5 best practices maybe to set up.
Absolutely. And I want to do stuff like that individually with business owners. I also just probably need to put some content together of like a one pager where it's like, this is the stuff that like when I talk to people, like everyone kind of has these questions. And so like it's a ready thing that people have. So maybe that gets them 90% of the way there, right? And then, I mean, you touched on this as well of just like, if there is a way to kind of take people that are currently, doing this work and just educating them enough on Bitcoin so that it doesn't seem like a huge hurdle for them. I think that just provides an avenue for, just like we try to educate on the Bitcoin side broadly, if you can take people that are already doing accounting, already doing bookkeeping, and just give them a few resources, I think that opens up the kind of the ecosystem to a better, more knowledgeable accounting industry, right?
Totally.
So I'd love to be able to do stuff like that over the course of the next few years.
Do you have a blog or anything like that?
I have a website, and I'm working on posting more and more content on there. Really just as a resource for, businesses, obviously, but maybe accountants as well, where they can go and there's ready resources for them.
You got to do that. I'm
Okay.
now pressuring you to do this. And then,
Well, it's on a podcast, so I got to do it now.
yeah, 100%. A lot of things I'm like, oh, yeah, we got to do this. And then I'm like, I follow up because life's about consistency and follow up. And I'm definitely following. The reason why I love this idea is like, you're right. All the same questions that we even beforehand, I'm like, oh, can you still like do the whole, I don't want to call it a loophole, but let's say you buy one Bitcoin at 60K and the price of Bitcoin goes down to 20K. You can sell that at a loss and then immediately buy that back in. I think the finance world, they call that a wash trade, which you have to wait like 30 days and like brokerage accounts and so on. But like that's a tax advantage way of reducing your capital gains exposure by doing something like that. I didn't know if that was still proper. Like having that guidance from someone now I've become more trusting of, and consistently having that kind of FAQ blog post that people can then reference and push out, I think will be very helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's one of those things. It's good that you asked about it, and that like I remember probably a year ago, it was like, oh, they're probably going to get rid of that this year, and they just never end up happening. But that doesn't mean they won't do it this year. And then 3 months from now, you're like, oh, I'm gonna realize some losses. You sell it, buy it right back, and then you didn't realize that they got rid of the rule, and you just ended up paying transaction fees for nothing, right?
Yeah.
And so being able to stay on top of that stuff, and probably a million other things. Getting that content, having a place for people to go and look for guidance there. Now that you've kind of put me on the spot, I'll make sure I work on that.
Dude, I think like what are other frequently asked questions? I guarantee wash trades is one. What are other like one or two that you've?
I mean, the other big thing is just people are kind of aware of like, hey, Bitcoin works a little bit differently from a tax perspective of like, what does that look? When do I owe taxes? And unfortunately, the answer is basically like whenever you use it for any type of payment, like that's a taxable event. And so that's obviously going to hold a lot of people back. And so if you have the right processes and procedures in place around it, you can track it at least. It doesn't get you around the tax, but it makes it so it's not a huge burden where, maybe I bought Bitcoin 5 times, but I used it for 100 transactions. If I had to go back and look at that over the course of the year, it's a big pain. But if I was tracking it along the way and said like, all right, every time I used it, this was the transaction and this is the gain or loss I recognized. Even just having an Excel file for that makes that relatively straightforward.
Dude, that's my problem there. It's like an Excel file. It's easy to say an Excel file or a Google sheet, but motherfucker, like I have like sheets, rows upon rows of stuff when I'm using it and trying to track it.
Yeah.
And I don't have a good system of having, I mean, I guess it's just like you sum it up at the bottom and then it's like, all right, gain or loss. And then you just submit, maybe that's like what I need to be doing. And I know you're shaking your head. You're like, yes and no, but.
Yeah, I mean, it really does get to when are you doing your accounting? What are your, what's your timetable there? If you're doing it monthly, you can just say like, hey, I'm looking at my books on a monthly basis. Here's my transactions. Maybe it's spending a couple hours on it every month. And you say like, all right, here's what I'm recording at, and my gain or loss for this month was X amount. And then you have that set, and then you don't need to go back and touch that again. It's in there. You don't need to worry about it. You have the documentation somewhere that you can reference later on, but making it whether it's a monthly, weekly procedure, like that's the key to get into.
The good and the bad of this whole thing is there's so much wiggle room. And if you make the reasonable effort, I feel like, and it's defensible, whatever 3-letter agency that's coming after you, which probably is going to be coming after me because I have Bitcoin in every single fucking name of mine, which I do not recommend to those listeners when they're starting a Bitcoin business to just leave the word Bitcoin out of it. is, all right, I made every reasonable effort based on the information I have at hand to play the game the way I think it's meant to be played, such that I can hold Bitcoin and preserve my future purchasing power. But the number of cycles mentally that I go through just to think through it all, it is paralyzing. And I do like the idea of a monthly, like close the books on a monthly basis rather than a quarterly basis. And you kind of get a snapshot and we just timestamp it, in our own quote unquote internal blockchain and just say,
Yeah,
this is our immutable ledger. We're done here.
exactly.
And go on about life.
And I think that's a really important point there when you talk about, the IRS or whoever. It's really important to think through the fact that like they could come after you for whatever they want, right? And part of the key at least is saying like, here's what I submitted, right? And here's my documentation for it. And so like they can come back and say like, the way you did that is wrong and you owe us extra money, right? But what you really want to avoid is the interest and penalties that they would assess if they say, hey, you didn't make any attempt or you intentionally did this wrong. You want to stay out of that area.
So, let me break that down, because if I make the intention and I'm trying to do it and then they're like, you did it wrong,
Right.
You don't pay interest or penalties on that?
I'd have to check on the interest, but the penalties you shouldn't have an issue with.
Okay.
And so it's like the penalty is for you intentionally did something wrong or you were not attempting to do it correctly versus like, this is my best attempt that I brought this money in. Here's how I valued it. Here's what I recorded. They're not going to blame you for not being a great accountant. I mean, if you have a CPA doing it, like they have separate issues that they have to address there. But if it's you doing it personally and you make an error there, like they're not going to ding you on that heavily.
Here's my other problem with you, which is not you specifically, but in general, the accounting whole world, especially with Bitcoiners, is like, I have to give you trust to like open up my not only my Bitcoin bank accounts, my like Bitcoin wallets, like my Bitcoin POS. Like you get a lot of information. So how do you deal with the whole privacy side? And like, I mean, client relationships obviously are, they have their own walled gardens. I get that. But for you personally, how do you deal with that?
It's one of those things where I don't have a great solution for it right now. I mean, it's obviously there's building trust in a community. And there's reputation risk of like, hey, I find out about all your information and I go tell somebody, like, obviously you're not going to be happy about that. And you're going to make sure that everyone else knows that I did that, right? And so that is a shield against that a little bit, but you still like, that doesn't help if you're the one person that like, I go around and share your information. It's kind of one of those things where it's a paradigm shift of, that's the way we work in the current world of like, you send your stuff to the CPA, like they have your information, everyone else has your information as well. I think there's some options that you could look at to say like, how do we do this? Where could you set up a system where it is, you have an accountant, you trust them, they have a reputation score there. They're ultimately going to need some of your personal information, but how can you reduce that? But I don't have a great solution for the fact that like when you see somebody's financials information, it's not really just how much money they have, right? It's like everything about their life. Yeah. It's like, what are you doing? What are you spending your time on? What are your relationships there? Like it gets really personal really quickly.
So here's my two recommendations. One is like just standard operating procedures, having mutual NDAs in place with each of your clients. I think that's like really a good start. And then second, and you're doing this probably already, which is like eating and breathing the privacy aspect of like securing your own data and making sure that your client's data is properly secured as well. Because whether it's QuickBooks access or this access, like even some things like 2FA and a bunch of other stuff. And you're doing this, I'm just speaking out around this because this is a potential blocker for a number of us that are like, I just don't want, I'll do my Google Sheets and I'll do my best effort here and then give an output to my tax accountant to then provide there as well.
I think something, and I don't know on the technical side as much, but if you could set up something where you had, I'm just going to call it Dropbox, even though that wouldn't be the great solution. Yep. You have a Dropbox there that, your CPA can access. They can go in there. to the extent that they can't copy or duplicate anything out of it, they can just see into it. And then after a certain period of time, they lose access to it. There's some issues there on the accountant side of like they need to have records to be able to go back and say like, here's why I filed what I filed for you. But like having it so that like it minimizes trust to the extent that you need to get that information filed.
I know. It's a blessing and a curse because you want to be able to have all those transaction IDs such that you can then say, hey, this is my, again, at the time I was doing this is what I did and why I filed it the way I filed it.
Yeah.
But then you're like, okay, done. Delete.
Yeah. I mean, going back to when I was in public accounting, like we'd have audit files and they would go back a number of years and like you would need that to reference to like, there's new people doing it. Like you need to go back and see the history of it. And like, you can't really lose that, but could you make it more private so that like you're not giving, there's not information in there that doesn't need to be in there.
Yeah, maybe there's a way where you can just have like one layer of like obscurity around the transaction ID. And then if you really needed to unlock it because you were audited, then you can unlock it at the client level. Again, just an idea. What is the time period around? Isn't there like a 10-year period where you then after 10 years you can't get audited? Or
I believe it's 7.
7? Oh, sweet.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
So just start ticking the clock off. You're like that return 7 years ago is good.
I'm such a punk. I think I pay more in taxes than I don't. I'm just like, yeah, we'll lean towards just paying a little bit more because I got too many kids. I got too much going on in my life, and I got a lot of headaches in my life. The last thing I need is another headache around the accounting side.
Yeah.
So again, it's not the right answer. You should pay as little as you can in taxes, in my humble opinion, and set up the right procedures such that you personally can take home as much money to provide for your family or do whatever you want in life. But it's just this like weight over your shoulder, especially in the Bitcoin world of like, all right, waiting for somebody to knock on the door and say, hey, show me your books and, give me more money.
Yeah. And I mean, kind of in that stream of like, I do my own taxes. I feel pretty comfortable with them. Not in that like everything's perfect in there. No one's ever going to ask any questions. But like I understand what I'm putting in that form and why I'm recording what I'm recording. And so maybe that's just an educational opportunity. Like if I were to work with you and say like, here's what you filed and like, here's why you should sleep well at night.
Dude,
and like,
let's go.
Yeah. So like making sure that you understand like, here's what's actually in here. And like, here's the area where people might have questions and like, here would be the answer to that. And it's just like, I just started doing tax returns for people more recently. But I've heard people like, hey, I gave this information to my CPA. He filed the taxes and he said, this is what I owe. And it's like, that's not going to give you a great feeling of like, here's how that actually worked behind the scenes, or here's the forms that you went through, and the rationing behind it. And so like, I think something like that could be really valuable to people.
This is the product line I'd recommend. The Sleep Well at Night by Joe.
Yeah.
Product line. I'm serious.
Can we brand that or something?
You can do whatever. Take it and run with it. But I'm serious. It's, again, I'm going to get this super right and super awesome so that I pay the least amount of taxes and I'm going to sleep well at night. But like having the way I'm thinking about, again, this is, now I'm talking my book, but again, having your oversight and insight into this just to be like, and then you and I maybe have like a 30-minute conversation. We look at, again, in my accounting system to say, hey, this is how how are you feeling about the business? Here's how I'm feeling about the businesses, blah, blah, blah. We're going through it all. And like, cool. Hey, here's all your Bitcoin transactions, incoming and outgoing. And here's why that we did this tax classification and why we're submitting it this way, or X, Y, and Z, whatever questions you may have. And then I'll be like, oh, that's cool. I got a certified CPA, public accountant, who's a Bitcoiner that gave me that extra, bear hug, if you will.
Right.
And to make sure he, fluffed my pillow and just, tucked me in real nice. Tom's giving me a big smile for that one. And then, I go to bed, get my 8 hours of sleep.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's really valuable. And it's something that like for the people that I'm working on tax returns for this year, like at the end, like I will go through whether they're interested or not. Like I'll go through with them and be like, here's kind of how it works. And some people are like, I don't really care. Like, just file it and be done. But like, I think a lot of people will want to be like, all right, I want to understand this because like I'm worried about the IRS coming after me, right? And so like, obviously, if I'm working on a return, help you file it. Like if the IRS comes and they want to audit you, like I would be there to support you. But like if you feel comfortable that you would have those same answers already, you're going to feel a lot better, without that IRS knocking at your door.
Yeah, 100%, man. So you're in business, and how long you've been in business now?
Just about a year.
Oh, awesome, man.
Yeah.
What's been the ideal client for you?
Yeah. So
Not some asshole like me that's got like 13 businesses that's asking you every single question under the sun always and just bothering you.
yeah, I mean, I thought my ideal client was going to be like, a Bitcoin company that kind of needs support that, would fill up 20, 25 hours. And like, that would be my main client base. And like, I would fill it in around it. What I've kind of gotten to, which has kind of been really nice of just like a lot of different businesses pretty early on in their startup journey, sole proprietors, partnerships, where I might be spending 2-3 hours a week on stuff with them, and really being able to support them as they need to grow. And so like maybe it is, hey, I'm just getting my accounting system set up. What do I go? How do I get it set up correctly from the start? To maybe you're at that stage and things are getting more complicated. Maybe you're just starting to accept Bitcoin. Really in anyone in that small to medium sized area where you feel like you're getting to a point where you need more accounting expertise, but you aren't ready to hire a full-time controller yet. I think there's a big gap there where you need someone with experience and knowledge, but you aren't ready to pay $100,000, $200,000 for, a full-time person.
Dude, let's go. There's probably so many Bitcoiners out there and just so many sole proprietors that's the cool thing, by the way, at the park. So our member, it's not just people working in Bitcoin that are members here at the park. It is actually Bitcoin curious or Bitcoin focused people that are dentists, doctors, real estate folks, lawyers, entrepreneurs, musicians, and so on. But yet they all want to accept Bitcoin or they use Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And so they're like, hey, and then they got to explain to their accountant.
Yeah.
And their accountant's probably like, dude, just don't use Bitcoin. Why are you doing this, man? Like, you want to check that box and blah, blah. Like, no, I don't. But I want to use this and I want to have the proper guidance. And that's where you could fill a big gap.
Yeah. And just, I mean, to make a little bit of a pitch back for Bitcoin Park, I think having places like this ends up being really valuable for people of like, I think it's really easy to have, like, you're a Bitcoiner, you have that thought, but having a place where people can go and like, hey, there are other crazy people like me that are also really interested and want to make this part of their business. And so maybe there's only 50 people in Tennessee, but if those 50 people in Tennessee are all part of Bitcoin Park, like there's a nice community there. You consolidate it and they learn from each other. And so like maybe I end up working with one person at Bitcoin Park and give them an amount of knowledge, and then they're sitting next door to somebody the next day and they're able to translate that to somebody else. And like you get that information flow a lot quicker that way. So
Totally.
like, I mean, the last 2 days here, it's been a great experience. And like, I think that's a lot of the stuff that you won't necessarily see on the financials of Bitcoin Park, but it's like kind of one of that underlying value creations that you have here.
Yeah, we absolutely love that. How's it been to be working on your own, by the way?
It's been interesting. It's one of those things where I do miss slightly the aspect of working with people in a business. It's nice working from home and having your own schedule. But that community aspect, you lose a little bit.
Like, were you going into an office and then?
Yeah. Pre-pandemic, I was going to an office, and so there's an aspect there that I think you miss as a sole proprietor. That's not in a community where you're working with people face to face. But it is on the other side of it is like, I'm meeting new people all the time, learning about what they're doing. And so that's something that you just don't get of like, if you work in a company with 50 or 1,000 people or whatever it is, like those are the people that you're going to be talking to every day versus like you meet a new person every week or a new person every day.
Yeah.
And they all have something slightly different that they're working on and different issues that to tackle. And so it's one of those trade-offs of like just something new, exciting every day versus, that community aspect that you have potentially at a company, depending on where you're working, that looks different. But just different trade-offs for different setups.
So I couldn't agree more. And by the way, one other point I wanted to make and go back to is people may have the altruistic view of wanting to use Bitcoin in their day-to-day life, and that's great. I've found it to be much easier to use Bitcoin, especially at the park and at other businesses, such that big shout out to John over at Zaprite. He's made my life so easy from sending invoices out to then collect Bitcoin and then having a system where I'm collecting all that, accepting Bitcoin with a Bitcoin address. It goes into our River bank account, a business bank account, and we have all those transactions there. And then we have a monthly report. And then now I got to tie that into QuickBooks and make sure that's, connection is there. And then like a couple connections. And I feel like you're this like connective tissue, if you will, of these systems amongst the Bitcoin world and I'm going to call it Bitcoin world, the digital world, and the freaking fiat world, the analog world. So like connecting those analog and digital world and then just giving that last little touch could be pretty massive.
Yeah. Just touching on Zaprite a little bit. I mean, have you talked to John on your pod?
Yeah. Well, I know John very well. Yeah. And he's going to come on the pod for sure.
Great. I mean, I think that's a great tool. I've used it. I refer people to it just in that like you're a Bitcoiner, you want to accept Bitcoin, but it's kind of a hassle if you're like, hey, pay me in Bitcoin, right? And they're like, I don't want to. And so like having those different options on there as well, where
Totally.
The way he has it set up, like you can have credit card, you can have Bitcoin, you can have ACH, maybe wire. And so it's like, I want to run everything through the same system and have everything tracked together. And I don't want to have to use a different setup for my Bitcoin versus somebody who wants to pay me in fiat. And so I think that's a really great potential use of that tool of like, hey, I got whatever it is, 10 invoices and 5 of these people want to pay me in fiat, 5 want to pay me in Bitcoin. I can use the same setup for all of them.
Well, yeah, and I'll explain for the audience how we've set it up here. So John, love you, Zaprite, V1, clunky, and he's working on V2 right now. But I love it, and I'm a power user of it, and I've created my own system where I create the contact first, and then create the invoice around that. On the wiring side, I have a template already set up with all our wiring instructions.
Yeah.
So even on a small invoice, I'll just delete the wiring instructions in the description, add the task, go on about life, and then click the check boxes for not ACH. I do Stripe, the credit card, and then Bitcoin, and then put a unique Bitcoin address, copy and paste from our River account. Awesome. That's out the door. One step before that is, for example, I mean, not to put you on the spot, but we're very excited to have you as a national member here at the park. But you're going to have a type form that you complete with your information and so on. But then you'll give the option to either send a wire, pay by credit card, or pay by Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And if it's pay by Bitcoin, cool. We get whatever, that's the email address or your Discord. We then send you a Zaprite invoice afterwards.
Yeah.
And then there's an address. And then what's cool with Zaprite is, you get the payment confirmation emails. So like you got sent it out. I think there's maybe a view. They viewed the invoice. They've done the first payment or zero conf payment, and then it's been confirmed on the blockchain.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, exactly. It's one of those things where we talk about like processes that need to be set up. Like I think this is a great tool of like when you do that and that's how you're accepting all your Bitcoin, all those transactions are in there, right? And so like I have built in my cost basis for like the price of Bitcoin when I received that payment was $19,250 or whatever it was. And so like having that like be able to go back to it at any point in time, it's just a great tool to have. And
Totally.
like I think more and more stuff like that's going to get built out and then eventually integrated into accounting systems. And so like I'm not doing any of this work. It's all flowing into an accounting system. It's just going to take some time.
God bless. But now here's my problem. Okay, so you pay your national membership. You pay Bitcoin.
Mhm.
Great. Comes into our River account. Alex, if you're listening, when labels, please, mi familia, so that then it goes into River. Then I got to go and export into a Google Sheet. At the end of the month, I got to go with our bookkeeper and say, oh yeah, that was Joe's national membership for this line item, and then blah, 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 and then blah, blah, blah. And then if we, by the way, you haven't run a business, with Bitcoin if you're not selling Bitcoin, because you have to pay your expenses in your local currency. So I don't care, like, whatever you're talking about, man. Like, that's just the truth. And so we sell all of our Bitcoin every freaking month, or almost every week and day, because we're not traders, and we have a lot of bills to pay. But then I sell it, and then there's a cap gain or loss short term. Yeah. But there's so much stuff that's still having outside that needs to be finessed in sheets that just gives me consternation and a little anxiety.
And one of those things where, to the extent that you want to try to reduce that,
yes, please,
something like IBEX, or I think there's probably other solutions as well of like
IBEX is really good, by the way, about this.
Yeah, so like if you knew, hey, if it's 100%, you could liquidate it, turn it to fiat, but like maybe you get to a point where it's like, I think I have margins of 10% and I'm going to be able to keep my profits at 10% and that's going to be my Bitcoin. And so you could get, hey, 10% stays in Bitcoin, 9% in fiat, and then that 9% in fiat, you never have to touch, right?
That's interesting.
And so that minimizes that work for you a little bit. And the other thing, I mean, I think you're in this world as well of like, if you are paying in Bitcoin to other people, obviously there's work there to do, but it reduces your price exposure as well of like, I got in, 10,000 sats the other day and then I paid out 5,000 sats. Like that price volatility isn't hitting you really. You have to worry about the account.
Yeah, but yes and no. Like, so we have a creative team in Colombia.
Yeah.
Shout out to the Creative Network. We love them. We pay them in Bitcoin every month. Awesome. And I actually pay them out of the River account, typically on chain because the fees were low. But we're going to bring Casey on this freaking podcast and talk about how the fees are getting on the base layer a little high for this thing called ordinals. Anyways, I digress. So it comes out of our River account. But then, like, I accepted, let's say, 10,000 sats at that cost basis, and then I send those sats, doing that calculation about whether the cap gain or loss.
Yeah.
Again, it paralyzes me.
It's one of those things where, like, you don't want to have it to be something you have to do manually with each transaction. You want to be able to look at it over the course of a week or a month and just do it as, like, one sum.
Yeah.
So, hey, there's all these transactions. It ended up being a net $25 loss or whatever the case is. And then like, if you feel good about that information that you have in there, you don't have to be like you're not doing work on every transaction. You have it set up so that you are booking in one journal entry a month and you don't worry about it.
You want to come back next month? Next month is the economics and incentives of Bitcoin.
Okay.
So here at the park, we were very, very fortunate to have the Spiral team, the LDK team, the BDK team, all here for Open Source Week. We had offsites for them and here at the park and so on. They're doing a BDK workshop on Saturday, and there's an LDK workshop going on right now. There's a number of things. Around that, I want to do like a coffee fireside stump the Bitcoin accountant guy.
Okay.
And bring all the heat.
Okay.
And all the smoke, as they like to say, and all the questions so that we can kind of vet this out, and basically make this a workshop,
for
an hour and a half, if you're up for it. I mean, I know it's like kind of free consulting and so on, so I'm very, but if you're cool with that, we can do that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's one of those things where it's like, especially where I'm at now, just from a business standpoint, it's like, I don't want to like give away everything, but also like, I want to spend time and like talk to people about this, and I don't want to like nickel or dime, but like, hey, every consultant, every hour, like I want to just meet with people to the extent that like we're creating value for their business. And I think over time, like if you're doing good work, like it ends up paying for itself. But like people need a place to start, right?
Totally.
It's like doing stuff like this. I enjoy doing it. The fact that people would show up to learn about accounting stuff always surprises me. So yeah, I'm happy to do stuff like that.
Here's how I'd approach it, and similar to how we're approaching Bitcoin Park, like you have a finite amount of time. You mentioned like the
Right.
20 hours here. How many hours a week do you personally really want to work?
Right.
40, 60,
Right.
80, 20? I don't know. 10,
Yeah.
5, 1? I don't know. Whatever that is up to you.
Yeah.
And so identifying that, like for us, when Matt and I were thinking about the park, we're like, all right, 200 people here is the max we can support.
Yeah.
And if they were all here at the same time, we'd be comfortable with 200 and that would be it. So that's where we zeroed in on 200.
Yeah.
Then we're like, all right, 100 locals here. If they were here all the time on both buildings on the entire campus, so we had 100 locals and then 100 nationals. That's our cap. And the way I look at it for you, and then we provide all these open community events from our bit devs to our monthly meetup to this workshop that we'd love to open up to everyone, and allow it to be as frictionless as possible to gain the knowledge of Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And then there's other like smaller summit ideas that are paid events that are specific, like our mining one and our lightning one. You may want to think about doing this as well, like what's the number of clients that you want to take on? And maybe it's 10.
Right.
And then those 10 are 4 hours per week on average and
Right.
not box it in. One client like me will be like 20 hours. And then you got other people that are like, 30 minutes and they're like, yeah, good, Joe. I got the Joe, Joe Pillow stamp of approval. And you kind of go from there. And then you're creating all this long tail knowledge that it then is like quality lead gen coming to you over time. And then you can build a business where you can maybe, do you have staff or is it just you right now?
It's just me right now. But yeah, I mean, that's something I'm thinking about as well. Of just like, I'd love to be open this up to the fact that like you have a brand where people know and trust and they know they're getting quality services there. And then, there are more accountants out there that are Bitcoiners that, I think it would be tough to make that leap for most people of just diving all in. But if it is like there are opportunities here and there, pick up a few hours a week, being able to work with other Bitcoiners, I think there's a real, interest there on the accounting side, and ultimately will be a need on the Bitcoiner side. It's just a matter of how long that takes to kind of build up and get there. But bringing those sides together is one of my long-term goals there. And I was just going to touch on going back to your previous comment. I think about like as far as your time and resources, it's not just like how many hours, but like who are you working with and what are you working on? I think like from what I've seen in the last couple of days, like you guys put a lot of work in here, right? And so like if it wasn't something that you enjoyed doing, and like really, you found value in, you wouldn't be putting in that big effort, right? And so I think it is partially like, is it 40 hours? Is it 20? Is it 60? But it's also like would be much more willing to spend an extra 20 hours a week on stuff that I really enjoy doing.
Totally. And you blur the line of like, is this actually work? And I kind of sometimes I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe I get to do this every single day. I roll in here and I see like this next Bitcoiner or this next like person that's like part of the community just rolling in here, working and building and creating. Do you know what the ultimate question is, by the way?
I don't know that I do.
Okay. Would you recommend this product or service to a friend? That's the ultimate question.
Right. Yeah.
And so what's really, really cool, if you're a great service, and I think you are, and I'm going to be testing this out and documenting it along the way, which is good and bad for you because I'm like a freaking high maintenance person. But is like I think you in the park, there was like 3 referrals of people. I'm like, oh yeah, he needs to talk to you. He needs to talk to you. She needs to talk to you.
Yeah.
Can you guys talk? And you're like, yeah, of course.
Yeah.
And you're like kind of like a doctor in a way. Hey, I got this ailment on my shoulder, like, what do you think? And you're like, well, I'm not that kind of doctor, but like, here's my like quick off the cuff, but you want to talk to this person about that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the doctor analogy is interesting just in that, like, I got the kind of the similar feeling, like sitting in the bit devs the other day. I was like, there are just people that are like, it's a different language of like, there are certain things that people learn over time that like you take for granted after a while, where it's like, this is not really that complicated. It's pretty straightforward. And then like you sit in a room where people are just like living that stuff every day. It's like a foreign language if you're not familiar with it. So it's just kind of an interesting analogy there. But what was the other part of your question?
Well, just in terms of like if you're doing great work,
right.
like so you may think like you're doing a lot of work, quote unquote, for free. But I will say like that maybe like me, for example. And then all of a sudden I'm recommending you to Tom over here. And then the next time, because I'm answering the question myself, would I recommend your service to somebody? And that answer's got to be a resounding 100% yes.
Yeah. And I think especially for service businesses, that's especially true because like if you are building a business where you have widgets and you sell those widgets, right? Like you're selling a product and people like, they use the product, they need the product, whatever the case is. When you're selling a service, like all you have is your reputation.
Yeah.
And so like if that's a good reputation, you're obviously going to bring more people to you. You're going to get more business. But if they're not, like things are going to go very badly very quickly, especially in the Bitcoin community. Like it's a really pretty small community. And so like word travels quickly in both directions, right? Of like, hey, I work with this guy. It was really valuable. I really found, good insights there and it was, affordable. And I felt like it was worth it versus like, hey, I spent a bunch of money. He said he was going to like do all these things and now my records are all terrible, right? I'm like, there's just like, it really is a compounding effect in either direction based on the quality of your services. And so like, I think as long as you know that up front, it will incentivize you to really put in a lot of effort and serve your clients well.
Well, buddy, I'm excited for you to come back now in March. It's already booked because we said it on the podcast.
Okay.
And I will say this, and then I'd love your like kind of closing thoughts on where people can find you. You shot me a DM, I want to say like maybe like a year ago or and I just assume like by the way, I'm not DMing you for all like my freaking impersonator accounts. I don't know why you're doing me, but you can go fuck yourself. But you shot me a DM and whatever, and I just ignored it because I'm like, okay, I just wanted to. And you kept on kind of like just staying on the radar and staying on the radar. And then I forget how we connected. And I said, hey, why don't you just come to the park and come experience Bitcoin Park and then let's just chat in person.
Yeah.
And you did.
Yeah.
And that means a lot. Like coming, you should build an online reputation, definitely. But also in these real life experiences, like whether it's going to PubKey or Bitcoin Commons or your local meetup, in Florida.
Yeah.
Just being there where you can shake hands and people can kind of talk to you about their ailments and so on and get Dr. Joe to give you, a quick diagnostic, I think goes a long way. So I just want to say thank you so much for coming here.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really important point there of just like relatively Twitter is an amazing tool of like, there's a whole bunch of people on there and you can reach out to them and connect with them. But there's still no replacement for that meeting in person, talking to somebody, sitting down with them. And so like, that's kind of part of what you're building here at Bitcoin Park, right? Like having a place where people can meet and talk, like that will always be really important for people.
Awesome. So where can people find you? We'll put this in the show notes as well.
Yeah. So basically SatoshiPacioli.com, that's my website. There's a contact form if you want to reach out. On Twitter, Satoshi Pacioli. Pacioli is Pacioli. But yeah, if you just Google it, you'll find me there. It's a still relatively unique name there. So I will be the only one out there when you Google that.
Heck yeah, man. Well, thank you so much, Joe. This has been an absolute pleasure.
Great. Thanks for having me.
Hey everyone, I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Joe as much as I did. Having an accountant like Joe who intimately understands both the fiat and Bitcoin systems and how taxable events affect those on a Bitcoin standard is vital to operating an efficient business in today's world. If you're enjoying the pod and want to automatically stay up to date, please like and subscribe in your favorite podcasting app. And make sure auto download is on. This would also mean the world to me. Lastly, come visit us in Nashville at Bitcoin Park. Go to bitcoinpark.com, we just secured that domain name, and see all the ways to connect with us and stay up to date. Until next time.